Hey everybody, it's Jason. Welcome back to the Mosaic Church Podcast. At the end of this podcast, please take a moment to connect with us on social media. It's a great place to learn more and to see what's happening at Mosaic. Most importantly, hope the following message encourages and inspires you to take a new step on your faith journey. Enjoy.
Well, last week we kicked off our new series, Open Hands. We started to look through this idea and this concept that to live radically generous, to live a generous life, we have to open our hands and stop holding on to everything like little toddlers. That's the end of my message. Amen. Let's go, right? Like when we are generous, we have open hands, but when we are not generous, we act like 3-year-olds. We talked about that special time in a store when you're at Piggly Wiggly and you see that poor mom and they got the toddler who was told no to getting the chocolatey Cocoa Puffs, and that child now goes into a full tantrum and is screaming, and the mom looks super anxious, and she doesn't want anyone to really notice, and all this guilt and shame's on her, but you still give that look of guilt and shame. But we try not to, and that mom's like so embarrassed. This child wants what it wants now, and I want it. Like, just give it to me now. And that concept really doesn't change much as we get to adults, because as we grow into adulthood, we start to believe what I've earned is mine, and mine is mine, and we say mine, mine, mine. We like to think that things change, but unfortunately inside of us we have this ideal, especially in our American culture, that I've earned everything, it is mine, and we start to hoard everything together. We watch that show Hoarders, and we see all these things, and we talked about this idea that when you look at your house, how much stuff do you have in your house? Just stuff that we accumulate and collect. And we looked at this idea last week that we have to rethink our idea of what it means to live a life as a follower of Christ, which is generous with everything. We're generous with our time. We're generous with our talents. We're generous with our resources. We're generous with our finances. And the problem with all of this is that we get into this sticky place because we have done such a poor job over the course of time as believers of when you see, let's go back to the 80s, right? Jim Bakker, PTL, and the abuse of funds, that we start as Christians, this becomes a very taboo topic. We don't want to talk about it. We kind of shy away from it because we've been abused by it. We've either been abused by what's been happening in Christian culture. We're abused by a church that maybe we attended. We start to feel like, I just don't feel like I'm supposed to give or be a part of that. Like my time is mine, my resources are mine, my finances are mine, mine, mine. And there's reasons why we get that way. There's reasons why we think I don't have enough time, I don't have enough resources. If I had more, I would give more to the work of God. And so our whole concept has been shifted upside down in our American Christian culture that has become very sick. And so pastors don't like talking about this. I don't like talking about this because it's uncomfortable. So welcome to Mosaic. Get used to uncomfortable, because this is where we need to sit. If something's uncomfortable, we have to ask a question. Why? Why is it uncomfortable? Why are we uncomfortable talking about this? Because Jesus talks about it. If you've read through Matthew, you've already seen he talks about this. He talks about open hands. He talks about giving. He talks about generosity. He talks about our relationship to our resources, but we have shied away from it because it's uncomfortable. So in our series, this is going to make you uncomfortable, but that's okay. The Bible says it, so I don't care. We have to start to embrace the things that Jesus talks about and be serious about it, because when it comes to the open hands of Christians, we have to rethink our relationship. And this is what I mean by this. What I have found in my experience, and this is my experience, yours could be different. What I have found in my experience is this. We as Christians are very open-handed if we see the result that we like out of it. So let me give you an example. I'm really excited to give to that huge screen behind the stage on Sundays because I get to see that I gave to that screen. So I bought that screen. So you feel good about the fact that you bought that screen. And when you come in, it benefits you because you get to look at the screen, right? I like to give to this cause that I see because I feel like I'm making a difference. And so it's inside of us somehow, some way, the American ideal got squished into us following the ways of Jesus. When we look at Jesus in our passage today, it's actually about the heart of giving and our worship to God, not the result you get at the end. Imagine this. Imagine that Jesus is sitting and talking with his people in America today. Let's just say Jesus is sitting down and he's our guest speaker. Give it up for Jesus. He's here to speak to you. And we start to explain to him, and he says, hey, explain to me how we as an American church view our generosity. And we would say, well, Lord, we have more abundance than most of the world, but we don't give. We have more resources, more things. We have so much at our discretion. But Lord, actually what we have become is we've become very miserly. We all don't like Ebenezer Scrooge at Christmas time, but actually we kind of become more like that. We start to see these are mine because I've worked so hard and I've done everything. And we start to gather unto me which is mine. And the Lord would rebuke us. He would rebuke us. When we look at the scriptures and the passage we're going to look at today, Jesus is looking at the heart of us and our why and what we see as worship. So this is new to you and a new concept. This is something new to you. This might shock you a little bit because depending on your religious background, there is you have to attend this place. I've told you this before. I don't know what anybody gives. This isn't about that. It isn't. I don't know your names. I don't know numbers. I don't know any of that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is changing our worship relationship with our resources to worship God in everything that we have. And so everything we have, everything goes from this is mine to this is yours. And that's what we're going to find in our passage today. So we're in Mark chapter 12, verses 41 to 44. Those who have Bibles, your apps, your iPads, all those things. We're going to read through Mark 12, 41 through 44. It'll be on the screen as well this morning. It says this: Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put in and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all she had to live on." So imagine this. Jesus is sitting down watching you give. And he's sitting here and he now makes this beautiful story come out of what is happening here. But to understand this passage, you have to understand the temple and what is happening in Jesus' time. First of all, the Jewish people are under the law of the Old Testament, which means they have to bring sacrifice to the temple, they have to account for their sins, and they also come to give their gifts and their acts of worship through their finances, through their giving. And so they would come to the temple, they traveled to the temple for this time of worship. But Jesus' time is different than our time, and women were not allowed into certain places and places of worship. Women were a second-class citizen in Jesus' day, in Jesus' time, not ours. Again, different culture, different time. And there was called the court of women. So inside of the temple would be the court of women. This is the first entryway into the temple, which a large area would be there, about 200 square feet or so. Men could also go here, but this is the furthest women could go. And they called it the court of women. Inside the court of women, they have these walls, and along these walls, they have these different vestibules, 13 to be exact, that were shaped like trumpets. And inside of these treasuries, or these chests, they're shaped like trumpets, which means that they flare and they come down looking like a trumpet. That's why they call them that. And in these 13 trumpets, they had 13 different reasons of why they would give into these 13 trumpets. Now, I can set up 13 trumpets around here if y'all want. But there was a reason why they would come and give to these different trumpets. Here's the different reasons why they would go. They had 11 were for gifts of worship, Two of them specifically, they had a half shekel temple tax. So there's a temple tax that they would give. But according to this amazing Alfred Edersheim, who's a great Jewish scholar, he lays it out like this for this of the 13 chests. 1, trumpets 1 and 2 were for the half shekel temple tax. Trumpet 3 were for women who had to bring turtle doves for a burnt offering. Okay? So if we look back, where does turtle doves and burnt offering comes in? That's most likely where Mary is trumpet 3. She had given her offering when she brought Jesus, where Simeon comes and holds him and then prophesies that he is going to be Messiah for everyone. We just talked about at Christmas time. So that was trumpet 3. Trumpet 4 was similar, but it was for the value of offering for young pigeons. So this was for the poor who could not afford more for their offerings. Trumpet 5 was used for the wood that was used in the temple, so they would give to that for the temple. Trumpet 6 was for the incense used during worship and during their time of sacrifices. Trumpet 7 and 8 was for a man who'd put aside for any sin offering. And then anything was left over after that, they would put into there for their sin offering. Then trumpets 9 through 13 for what was left over after everything. After all their giving, this was then their above and beyond gift. So you have all these 13 trumpets lying around this court, and Jesus is sitting in the court of women, watching in the temple as people are bringing this to their gifts. So as he's sitting there and he's watching all of this, look at these details as we go back to our passage and look what Jesus is saying. Now that we see Jesus is there watching, and he's going to bring his disciples in to this crowd. Listen again, 12:41-44. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting in their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So he's sitting there. There's a crowd. Everyone's there for the sacrifice and the worship. Remember, we got to put ourselves into the movie, put ourselves into what's happening. There's a crowd, and there's all this hustle and bustle, and people are coming, and they're very wealthy people. We can tell they're wealthy, right? Because wealthy people dress like wealthy people. So they're coming in, and they're going to the trumpets, and they're putting in their gifts, and they're going to these final above and beyond gifts, and they're putting in very, very large amounts of finances. And then this woman comes up. Now, a widow in this time was the outcast of the society because she could not provide for herself. Most likely homeless, relying on the help of others, relying on the finances of others to take care of her. And so this woman comes up with nothing. She has nothing. And she comes and gives everything she has into the gift of the temple for God. And now, what we have a tension with is sometimes people say, well, tithes and offerings and giving, all that was an Old Testament thing. Here Jesus is sitting. He doesn't say, hey, don't do this anymore. He's like, no. Look at the heart of this woman. So the crowd is all around. The disciples there. Hey, guys, come in here. So he's sitting there watching, giving. He calls his disciples, I want you to see this. Do you see all these guys over here? Do you see all these people giving so much? They are giving hundreds of times more than this lady. Hundreds of times more. They're giving so much, but it doesn't cost them anything. It's not costing them anything. Because if they're giving, let's say, 1% of all that they have all these finances, and they're giving this is 1%. This woman just gave 100% to the cause of what we're doing here for God. Do you see her heart? Now, why is this so incredibly important? Generosity and the heart of what we do with the things given to us matter greatly to God. If we believe that we own anything, we misunderstand that the God of the universe, who has Saturn spinning on his finger if he wants right now, owns everything you have. Everything we have is his. Everything we have, our time, our breath, our life, our finances, our resources, everything, our talents, our gifts, everything is his. And when we are mine, 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 it goes completely against the way of God. And then he takes it a step further. Because it isn't about, I guess I have to give to something and begrudgingly giving away. It's about, what are we doing to believe that God is going to provide for us by giving everything we have sacrificially? Now again, I understand that there's been abuse in this room by people who you've given, and maybe you've been very generous, and you've gone through, and you're like, Jason, you don't understand my story. I've been burned by this 100 times. And this is what I share to you about this, because I understand that story. I've been there. Here's what I say about this. We have to rethink our narrative, because it isn't about where it goes. It's about our heart of giving to God. And when we give open-handedly to God, we open our hearts up to something so much greater, so much bigger. And it's about our gift of giving to Him. Now, I'm not saying the abuse was correct. I'm not saying you shouldn't have that feeling. I'm just saying let's rewrite our narrative. If we rewrite the narrative to say, I give everything I have to God open-handedly, it's for Him to decide because He's the ruler of all. But it's my action, it's my hands that will be blessed when I'm the one giving sacrificially. Now, sacrificial giving was an interesting concept for me when I was younger. We grew up, when I first got married. I've heard this story, those who've been around for a while. My wife and I had very little, very, very little. We had our first child. We're eating like carrot stir fry, so we had carrot and like soy sauce. We were struggling, man. We just had nothing. And I always thought this way. You know what? I can't wait till I make a lot of money, because when I make a lot of money, oh man, I'm gonna be so generous. Like now, we can't give anything because we're living on carrot stir fry, right? The truth is, we had finances. The truth is, I could have gone to the store to get something else. The truth is, I'm just cheap. But we had little, and I didn't even think, hey, we should just give a little. I was thinking, God, you're not gonna provide for me, so I've got to take care of myself. Now, this comes from a deep-seated issue within Jason. This is Jason's confession time. Hope y'all are ready for this. I grew up in poverty. I grew up with not a lot when I was a young child. I grew up on welfare. I grew up on commodity cheese and boxes that were unmarked from the government. I grew up like that. I grew up with my mom making miracles out of dried beans and rice. I don't know what she did, but she had miracles. I grew up that we couldn't get a pizza on Friday night. Like, we couldn't afford those things. That's how I grew up. And so as a child, when I became into adulthood, I remember thinking, I have to make sure that never happens to me. So what I started doing is if every hay penny I got, I had to store it away like a squirrel storing nuts for the winter, because I don't want to ever get to that situation again. And sure enough, in my early marriage, we were back into that quasi situation. Now, we didn't have to go that far. We were able to eat, and we had food on the table. But what I saw then is like, okay, I have to protect me first, and then I will think about anything that's extra later. And so I paid my internet bill, I paid my phone bill, I paid my bills like that, which is right, I pay all my bills. And then that was extra, store like nuts, so that we never get to that situation again. At the same time, I remember this. We were in church, and my mom would always give me like a quarter or 50 cents to put in the offering basket. Back old school, remember we used to pass baskets? Remember those days? Or depending on your church environment, they'd have like the thing on a stick and like jingle it in front of you. It doesn't work. I'll do it if you want. Like, just jingle it. Like the shame. Like, and if you ever question, why don't we do that? Because that's not giving, guys. That's like the opposite of Mosaic Church. We don't even do that anymore because I don't want that. I don't want you to feel like, oh man, this guy's... That's not the opposite of what we're doing. I want you to have the joy of giving generously because of your worship to God, not like, oh, I better give a tip or this guy's going to see me. Like, I don't want you to do that. I want it to be such a beautiful heart, but so many of us don't understand the heart of what Jesus said. And so when I had so little, my mom would give me 25 cents and I put it in the offering basket as go by. It cost me nothing because it's my mom's 25 cents. And then I got a paper route, and my mom's like, hey, you need to give to the church. I'm like, like, I make like $10 a week, you know? She's like, okay, well, you need to give. And so then I would take my $10, and I had a little fun, little like envelope, I have a little envelope, like, okay, I got to give 10%. My mom was teaching, you got to give 10% to the church. And so I said, okay, I put $1 in there. And that cost me something because I couldn't get the new Sega Genesis. I'm putting $1 in here, like it's costing me something now. I'm like, Mom, give me the quarter back, right? Like I want to put the quarter in, but it didn't cost me anything. When I was putting in that $1, making $10, it cost me something. And it was then turning into the joy of it. But unfortunately, when I got older, I lost that for a while. I lost it for a while. The generosity that God had to teach me and show me changed my life later in life. It flipped the whole mode. And then I started to hear, and I had a great pastor who taught about this, rethink our relationship with our resources. Everything is God's. Open your hands and give freely. And so I changed my entire relationship with it. My time, my talents, my gifts, my resources. I opened my hand. I said, hey, this is pretty fun. I started to see it not as a burden, but as a joy that I get to do this. I'm a part of something bigger than myself. I'm moving a cause forward other than me. I fell in love with it. And the more I said, okay, well, how do we become more generous? What can we do with all that we have, everything we have for everybody else? Let's just give our stuff away. I love it. And then I went and did homeless ministry in the street of Atlanta. I went to the streets of Atlanta. I went down there, and we were there for a youth conference. I was at a youth conference down there, big youth conference, big speakers. 10,000 youth workers are down there. This is years ago. And we're all walking to this big arena, and I'm walking by all these homeless people. And you could see who these people were because they all had backpacks on, because we got free backpacks, So they're like black and orange, so we stood out, and everyone's walking, and just walking by all these people, ignoring them on the street. And I got this feeling in my stomach, this sickness in my stomach. And I said to my friends, I'm like, dude, I can't go listen to some guy preach when I'm walking by all these people on the street. Let's go grab some food and let's just spend some time with these people. And so I went, I just spent some time. We did that. We spent some time and just literally just hung out at the CNN Center. All the screens are going. People are down there watching TV and just hearing people's stories. Oh, the stories, if you've ever had the opportunity to hear stories of people in need, stories of one choice made a big difference, a story of parents dying and they have nowhere to go, stories of educations greater than all of us put together, just fell on hard times. You hear these stories and these stories and these stories. And one kid, we're talking this one time, and he goes, do you have a car? We're talking, yeah, I've got a car. He's like, man, you must be rich. I'm like, dude, it's like a 1989, junker, He's like, you must be rich. He goes, don't tell me you have 2 cars. I'm like, yeah, we have 2. He's like, you have 2 cars? He's like, don't tell me you have your own house. Totally changed my way of thinking even more. As my generosity, I'm like, man, there's people who have nothing, and I'm complaining. There's people without food in their stomach, don't have a place to go, are out in the cold, that here I am griping because I don't have enough to get that thing that I want more than anything. Generosity is a mindset and a lifestyle. It's not a guilty thing you have to do. Generosity is rethinking, like that woman who sat there and said, I'm going to give all that I have. Because Jesus points her out in this crowd of all of these people, that those who are all giving, and he didn't condemn them. He didn't say they didn't give anything great. He didn't say these people are wrong. He didn't say they shouldn't be giving. He didn't say any of that. He says, I want you to see something, because Jesus is such a master of teachers. He says, I want you to see something very, very special right now. You believe that when you have much, you give, and you do. I'm saying to you, see this woman, she's given everything she has for the kingdom. Everything she has. I just want you to process right now. Process right now. Your entire financial accounts, all your savings, all your loans, all your IRAs, 403s, 401s, sell your home, everything you have, would you turn it in right now? That's what she did. That's what she did. And you start to think, well, that's just dumb. Why would you do that? Why would you give everything? How are you going to get food, lady? Oh, great. And now now I have to give her more money to take care of her because she gave everything to the church. Now that's my responsibility. Now why isn't she taking care of herself? We start to go into the American mindset that what you need to earn that, and I need to take care of that, and now I have all these issues. We start to get all this mess and all these problems. And when we just look at the heart of what Jesus is saying, you are to be radically generous and sacrificially give. Because when you sacrificially give, you trust that God has your back. You trust him. Do you want to tell somebody to change their mindset who grew up on welfare to not try to keep everything now that I have a salary? I mean, my mind struggles so hard with this concept. And I'm just being real with y'all, because if you're struggling, I struggle because inside of me says, protect, protect, protect. I need to take care of things, which is rightfully so. But when we start to get to this generosity part, I'm like, okay, well, if I didn't give generously, I could do all these other things. I could buy all this stuff. I could do this. I could do that. And your mind starts to go in all these different directions. But Jesus doesn't talk about that. He talks about your heart, her heart, and this woman who gave everything. If it makes you uncomfortable to think of emptying all of your assets, not suggesting it, but it makes you uncomfortable, I want to put you to the concept of the young man, the rich young ruler comes up to Jesus, and we mentioned this last week, the passage last week where this guy, he's like, I followed all the rules, Jesus. Since I've been a boy, I've kept all the Torah. I've kept all the laws. I've done everything. He says, there's this one thing that you lack. Sell everything you have and follow me. And he said, no, that's too great of a sacrifice. This is our Jesus. This is the red letters that you're going to be reading through 2025. And why we're talking about this with such fervence is that because this is such an important concept to know what Jesus really said and what he expects of us. Because if we are to be transformed into the characteristics and priorities of Jesus, which is what discipleship is, we must take onto ourselves the things he cares about and what he wants from us. If you want to look like them, we have to start to act like him. And Jesus is radically generous. God is radically generous. And all of this generosity as it comes together, he says, so now you be generous as I am generous. And the rich young ruler said, no. Those two stand in such huge contrast. The rich young ruler and the widow woman inside of the temple going to the trumpets. People were giving into all of these trumpets. They're giving into all these treasuries, giving rightfully so their tithes, their offerings, they're giving. And this woman, in contrast, is given everything she has, and Jesus admonishes her. The young man who said, I've kept every rule. I have done everything right. I've done everything. He says, just sell everything and follow me, because Jesus had to know that his heart was tied into what he had. And he could not follow Jesus if he had his heart tied into his things and his money and his possessions. That's a weird thing about stuff, man. It's weird. We have a weird relationship with stuff. You have feelings about things in your home. Think about this. Oh, this was my great-grandmother's teapot, came over on the boat from Germany. And then we have like feelings tied into inanimate objects. We have feelings tied into things because we have a relationship with these things. And that relationship could be my issue, security. It can be safety. It can be need. It can be, I just feel more comfortable if. All these things put together, and Jesus is like, y'all, guys, it's not wrong to have things. It's not wrong to have finance. None of that's wrong. Jesus doesn't say that. He says your relationship to those things, your relationship to giving is what matters. Jesus always talking to the heart. Our heart leads to our hands. So here's our challenge this morning. I'm not taking you off the hot seat yet. I got 4 more minutes. I'm going to let it rip. When we started Mosaic Church, we created our core values. We have 5 core values. If you're newer, come to our lunch and learn. You're going to learn all about them. Core values. What's a core value? Why does it matter? You know, everyone has a vision statement. You know, and if you go to churches, it's a little different for us. When we sat down, our core values are the hills we're going to die on. Hills we're going to die on. And your core values is what gives your family its flavor, right? So we're going to take aside, you know, we believe in the Bible, the Holy Spirit. That's all doctrine, right? So that's this side of things. Core values are what's the hills that like we are just obsessed with, focused on. Because we believe if we can nail these 5 core values, the transformation of Jesus in our church community is going to come through solid theological and doctrinal teaching, put together with our core values, creates a culture of us being activated. So our love where you live, the idea that we give out and not in, all this stuff comes from statements of our core values. So if you haven't ever seen our core values, they're on our website. Go take a look. If you want to revisit our core values, please do that. If you want to learn about them, come to our lunch and learn. Core value is radical generosity. I preach the core values all the time. Some of y'all just don't know it. Core value is radical generosity. And so radical generosity, then I have a statement what it means. It means this: everything we have for everyone else. 6 years ago when I was sat down and we were working through core values, I sat on radical generosity for a long time because I didn't like it. I didn't like it because of this. That inside sick Jason that says, well, man, if we just get a ton more, we can build a bigger church, and a bigger church with more ministries, and more ministries, we can have a slide with a treehouse for our kids' ministry. And then we can have our own coffee shop. We'll call it like Holy Grounds Coffee Shop, right? And we're going to build this mega church, and I'm going to be on TV, and then I get a Learjet. I'm going to be blah, 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 blah. The great American pastoral dream. I left all that for a reason, and I sat down with radical generosity, and I said, everything we have for everyone else? And I just sat. So when you're writing core values, it's really important, man. Like, because this is going to be, when you guys walk in and are part of this story, we're teaching this, and this is such a key aspect of who we are. Radical generosity just like sat in my heart like this is so unbelievably right. But how in the world do we do this? They're like, do I want to make this a core value? People aren't going to like this. People are, it's so weird. No one wants to talk about giving and giving your time, talents, and money. Everyone's like, I just want to come and watch you have a nice speech and go home. And I'm like, God, how am I going to grow a church this way if we talk about this? It's a core value. And I just went through back and forth and back and forth. And I just sat down and I'm like, this is really important because it's changed my life. And I know it can change others. Because if I can't view God as the generous God who's given me everything, even the beans and rice were from the hand of God, I never went a day without food in my tummy. If I cannot see God as the generous God, how in the world can I say that I'm a follower of Jesus? He's generous. And so if we keep thinking that it's everything for me, how can I lead a ministry and say, I'm here to serve you when it's all about me? So unfortunately, and fortunately, I wrestled with this for a long time, and radical generosity came out. I use the word radical because I'm from the 80s, and I like that word. And this is what I wrote. Since the beginning of time, God has been the embodiment of generosity by making us stewards of what is rightfully his. We deliberately pray for God's blessing in our lives, not to keep or hoard, but so that God would reach someone else through our generosity. However, We understand generosity is not limited to material things. We believe we should also be radically generous with our grace, mercy, and forgiveness that God has extended to each of us through Jesus' death. This was written years before I even knew I'd be talking about it with you. And I sat down and I took the verse of this widow and I wrote it into words that says this: if God is the embodiment of generosity to a group of people that don't deserve it, why should I not be generous? I should be just as generous even though people don't deserve it. My hands have to be open because I'm not deserving of his generosity. Why do I have to believe I'll be generous when someone deserves it? So I started to rethink this whole model, and God's been doing such a work in my life over time to say, Jason, I've given you talents, I've given you time, I've given you the abilities, I've given you finances, I've given you resources, I've given you these things, everything you have for everybody else. And now you see that. You see that by what we do next door at the school. You see a relationship with Hope Street. You guys were radically generous. 40 baskets, y'all? 40 baskets? That's so unbelievably great. That's radically generous. We're giving and we see it and we're embodying it. But as a church family, what does it look like for the word radical? Radical doesn't make sense. It's outside the bounds. Radical is a word that makes us a little uncomfortable because it's unsafe. Radical is unsafe. Well, 80s, like, I'm rad. Like, that's totally different, right? But radical is unsafe. It means it's outside our comfort zones. And so, Mosaic Church, I'm challenging us to rethink our relationship with generosity. What does it look like for you to live radically generous in 2025? Here's what I know. In our finances, we are behind every month. Here's what I know. We have zero-based budget. Here's what I know. We do not have enough workers for our ministries. Here's what I know. We're always seeking more leaders. Here's what I know. The majority of people who call Mosaic Church home have an opportunity to jump into all those areas. And that's all of you. This is a church family that is built around a community, you've heard it many times, and not me. It's built around a group of people who are a family on mission to be transformed into the characteristics and priorities of Jesus. Our vision statement, igniting a movement of radical love that transforms our community and the world. That requires all of you, your time, your resources, your gifts, your talents, all of you to jump on board for something that can change the world. Now, if you're like me, I hear a message like this and I say, good speech. I would sit there and I would hear these when I was younger, and I thought, I understand, but that doesn't necessarily pertain to me because here's my X, Y, and Z situation. You don't understand my situation. I'm a young dad. I don't have finances. I'm super busy, right? Whatever it is. The reason I'm always on the go all the time is because I want to use all of my time for the kingdom. The reason why I'm trying to impact so many different areas is that I'm in the second half of my life, and I want my second half to matter for the kingdom. The reason why I've run out of excuses is because God's taken excuses away from me by transforming my heart. And so I challenge you today, we're going to have a time of just some silent reflection and prayer. Ask God to search your heart and your relationship with generosity. This is not guilt. This isn't shame. We're not passing a bucket. I'm not going to shake the little thing in front of you. That's not what we're doing. What does it mean to be radically generous in your life? What does it mean? What's your next step? What does it look like to grow to be more like him? That woman gave everything she had. The rich young ruler had everything and said, I'm not going to give to that cause. Where are you with this?
Once again, thank you so much for listening. If you live in Southeast Wisconsin, we would love to connect with you at our weekend gathering. For service time, directions, and to learn more about our vision to ignite a movement of love that transforms our community and the world, visit us at mosaicwi.com.